Hey guys, MoiDawg here, and today we're going to be going over tanks. This video is a complete overview for both the tanks themselves and the tank crew positions. We'll be going over some basic vocab, taking a look at each and every tank in the game, and we'll be discussing how crew members can become better drivers, gunners, and commanders. At the end of it, we'll also go over specific tank-on-tank strategies to go over those typical matchups you would run into in a usual game of squad. This guide is intended for players of all skill levels, and I've created this video in a way which each tank will go over a specific crewman's skill and then explain a tip on how to use that tank more effectively. For example, we'll start off simple with how to turn stabilization on and off, but then we'll move on to more advanced topics, like making sure your gunner has a level firing platform, swapping weapons to take out certain targets, how to read the Leopard's crazy looking rangefinder, and also how to get your tank up and moving when it's disabled. At the end of the video, we'll also explain and cover armor weak points and key vehicle components, so that way you know where to hit a tank when you come up against it. By the end of the video, you should have everything you need to know to play each and every role in the tank, in all of the tanks, since these skills build upon each other. I will say, however, that this video includes the factions and weapons as of Beta 18, March 2020. More than likely we'll be getting additional vehicles in the future, but the concepts covered here should be able to bridge that gap. If there is anything that is added to the game that I do think would be beneficial for you guys to know, I'll link that video in the description below. Now before we kick it off, I do want to say that I stream a lot of squad on Twitch, at twitch.tv/MoiDawg. I squad lead, run vehicles, and play practically every kit and vehicle in the game. So if you have other questions or simply want to watch some squad live, come hang out. We also run viewer-only squad on Supporters Sundays, where I lock a squad and squad lead for you guys. It's a lot of fun, so I hope to see you there. But let's get back to the tanks. To begin, let's quickly go over the kit and some other terms you may or may not be familiar with. Now, whether you're operating a tank as either a driver, gunner, or commander, all tanks require crewman kits. For squad leaders, you will have to take the lead crewman role, which is unlocked when you have a second player join your squad. These kits have limited small arms ammo, iron sights, and repair kits. The tanks themselves can fire a wide variety of ammunition. You'll frequently hear players call for the following. Sabo or AP rounds are your armor-piercing Sabo rounds, the round required to destroy tanks. These penetrate armor and do a lot of damage, and should be your primary ammunition at all times. Heat or high explosive anti-tank rounds are primarily used for lightly armored vehicles, such as scout cars or MATVs. Frag rounds are fragmentation rounds used to kill infantry. Think of them like a giant grenade, but remember that they won't do any damage to vehicles. Hesh or squash are high explosive squash heads, restricted to the UK's Challenger tank. These are also fragmentation rounds, but they can do quite a bit of damage to lightly armed vehicles or unarmed vehicles like lodges and transports. Lastly, coax is a tank's machine gun and is primarily used against infantry targets. Now that we got that out of the way, we can finally start talking about tanks. Let's start off with the T-62, the most basic of tanks in squad. It is the only non-unique tank in the game, meaning that it is used by both the insurgents and irregular militia. The tank itself holds a standard crew of a driver, gunner, and commander, but also has an open-top machine gunner position available if anyone is brave enough to jump on it. Additionally, 4 teammates can hop on the back for transport if needed. The T-62 is far from a modern tank, and you can see that even in the driver's seat. The driver has a very limited degree of visibility through the front and right viewports, meaning he'll need a lot of communication to make sure he knows where he's going. The command hatch has roughly 270 degrees of visibility from the front of the gun, meaning that he will not be able to see behind the tank unless the barrel itself is turned. By pressing Q, you will zoom in on your sights. In this sight, you'll see a stadia at the bottom half of the optics, indicating ranging for targets at distances 800 meters to 3,000 meters. Although this is historically accurate, it is often better to just use an observation mark, your compass, and your terrain for accurate callouts and assisting your gunner finding targets. If you do find yourself in a bind and need to use them, however, simply line up the bottom of the target with the horizontal line and see where the top of the target touches. Unfortunately, this will only work for targets that are 2.7 meters tall. Although many of the tanks are around this size, it's probably better to get an accurate mark if possible. The T-62 is equipped with both anti-vehicle and anti-infantry rounds, as well as a coaxial machine gun, with 12 Sabo rounds, 8 heat, and 20 frags, the T62 can take out a wide variety of targets. By pressing 1 through 4 or using your mouse wheel to scroll, you can select the appropriate round and load it, which you can hear as well. As a gunner, your job is extremely important, and you'll need to be able to quickly identify what type of vehicle you're engaging, what round you are supposed to use, and the distance to the target. In the gunner seat, your optics will look like this. Once again, pressing Q will zoom in and you'll see a bunch of arrows, numbers, and Russian lettering. This may look intimidating, but it's actually quite straightforward. As the T62 is fairly old, the top portion of the sights were historically used to acquire targets, with each type of ammunition indicated below. Although Squad have kept these sights as well as the Stadia sights for the gunner, we will actually be using the chevrons in the middle part of the optics. Before taking your first shot, you want to make sure you're stabilized. You'll notice on the right side of your screen, there's the letters S, T, and A. This stands for stabilization, and is incredibly important. Stabilizing the gun allows for the barrel to stay positioned on the current bearing no matter how the tank is moving. This allows for a stable firing platform for scanning and firing. Press Z to turn on stabilization, which is then confirmed by the letters turning bright yellow. As you can see here, with stabilization, I am able to keep my turret locked in at the target as the tank rolls over uneven ground, as well as when the body of the tank changes position. When stabilization is off, the turret moves with the tank, making it extremely hard to shoot and prone to misfiring if the tank moves. Now that we're stabilized, let's take a look at the sights. The large chevron in the middle is 400 meters, as shown by the small 4 next to it. This would mean that the 3 is 300, the 1 is 100, and 0.5 is 50. For ranges greater than 400 meters, we can use the smaller chevrons in the middle. As you can see, however, there are a lot of ranges missing, and this is where you have to do some guesswork. I find that the midway point between the 1 and 3 is about accurate for 200 meters. And about level with the 4 directly underneath the large chevron itself is accurate for 500. Do note that these distances will change depending on the ammunition type. So although the middle chevron is 400 meters for our Sabo round, it's only 300 meters for heat and frag, and only about 250 meters for the machine gun. You can double check what ammunition type you currently have loaded by which one of them has a line over it on the sights above, or you could simply look at the bottom right of your screen. Now when you do have the correct range, fire on your target. Once the round is out, you'll have to press R to reload the next round. Do not forget this. If the round isn't chambered, you'll see it in gray, and when it is ready to fire, it will reload in white. Although not as advanced as the tanks it's typically up against, the T62 is really fun to use, with the round turret resulting in many deflections, a wide variety of ammo, and the quietest tank engine in the game. A crew that has good communication can easily take down tanks like the Challenger. My biggest advice I can give to any T62 squad is to run at least a 3-man crew. As the driver can only see 90 degrees, the commander can only see wherever the front turret is facing, and the gunner's turret moves slowly in general, having more eyes searching for targets is always a good thing. You'll have to learn that your tank is innately at a disadvantage without many things like range finding and smoke deployment, as we'll see in the future. To overcome that, use your communication. I would also strongly recommend that the squad leader be the gunner in order to quickly acquire ranges. By placing an observation mark on a target, you'll be able to quickly find the range, line up the shot, and fire. Additionally, I like to give the commander and driver fireteam lead. This will allow them to place observation marks, attack marks, and also put down enemy markers as they see them. For the Americans, we have the M1A2 Abrams. Like the T62, the Abrams has a standard 3-man crew of a driver, gunner, and commander, and also an open-top machine gun. As a driver, you'll notice that your visibility is far better in the Abrams. With a full 180 degrees, it's much easier to see where you're going, as well as look out for enemy targets. You'll also notice that in every tank, the driver has a specialized HUD that shows speed, tank damage, and component damage, as well as tank positioning. We'll discuss a lot of these items later on, but for now, let's focus on the speedometer. To start the tank, press and hold E to turn on the engine. Once on, you'll use WASD to move and turn the tank. As you speed up, the tank will automatically change gears to allow you to go faster. However, in some cases you'll want to stay in gear to get over troublesome terrain. To stay in your current gear, press and hold Shift. This is especially useful for getting over hills and other steep inclines, as staying in a low gear will allow the tank to keep climbing. While you can use S to stop the tank and move in reverse, pressing spacebar will initiate the handbrake, quickly stopping the tank in its tracks. As you're driving around, you'll see that the tank icons to the left and right keep changing. This helps indicate how the tank is positioned in relation to the terrain. As a driver, it's important to try to keep this as level as possible, as it will allow the gunner to get more accurate shots. Having the tank positioned on uneven terrain will cause shots to drift off target, whereas being too vertical or having the hull slanted into the ground can create zones where the gunner cannot shoot. In technical terms, you want the tank to have good gun depression, essentially allowing the gunner to move the turret up or down in the current firing zone without any issues. Frequently check in with your gunner to double check he has depression and adjust as needed. You also might have noticed that in the bottom right of the screen, there's something called a smoke generator. All tanks are equipped with smoke to help conceal themselves. To use it, simply press and hold left click. Smoke will run for about 30 seconds, and it's usually best used in short bursts when disengaging from the enemy. When using smoke, you'll see that underneath the gear and the speedometer, a number pops up next to the ammo symbol. This is an indicator for how much ammunition is missing from the tank as a whole, including driver smoke, gunner ammunition, commander gun, and machine gunner ammo. As you can see, to completely refill the smoke generator, you'll need 75 ammunition, which can be replenished by pulling up to a repair station. As the ammo slowly loads in, you'll see the remaining left on your screen, and your smoke generator ammo will move from gray or empty all the way back up to white. As a modern tank, the command hatch has both ranging and firing capabilities, with 360 degrees of visibility and a Browning 50 cal crow's nest gun to fire at infantry targets. Just like we learned with the T-62, we can also use C on the crow's nest here to stabilize it, which can be confirmed by the giant red stabilized letters that appear on the right side of the screen. The bottom left of the screen also has a lot of critical information as well, with the machine gun ammo count, the current range of whatever you're aiming at, and the directional indicator in relation to the tank. This indicator is useful to help provide accurate callouts, as sometimes it can be easier to tell your crew left or right side of the tank instead of giving compass directions. Lastly, you can also press Q to zoom the command sight as well. Pressing it twice will provide a 12x zoom, also bringing up the range ticks on the sight itself. Do note that this gun is sighted for 300 meters, with the 100 meter mark indicated above it, and it ranges all the way up to 1500 meters. Now for the gun, the Abrams is equipped with a lot more firepower. 21 armor-piercing sabot rounds, 21 heat rounds, and 2,000 rounds of coax machine gun ammo. It also has 2 deployable smoke screens that fire in the direction the turret is facing. One other change you'll notice with the modern tanks is the automatic rangefinder, which you can see at the bottom of the screen. For targets up to 1500 meters, the rangefinder will automatically tell you the distance to the target in order to quickly range your shots. This is much quicker and far more accurate than the observation mark trick we learned with the T-62. When we zoom into the sight, we can then take that information from the rangefinder and land accurate shots. At the top of the sights, we once again have a Stadia sight to size up targets with, but to be honest, I've never used this because of the automatic range finding the tank is equipped by. As a gunner, simply focus on the sight picture in the middle of your screen. The sight itself is ranged for 700 meters, with 100 meters at the top, all the way down to 2100 meters at the bottom. Realistically, you will only be using this section of the sight, and very rarely will you try to lob shots at 1500 meter targets. The one major downside to the Abrams, however, is that the sights leave a lot of distances unaccounted for. For the middle ranges, I find that the bottom of the vertical line here is fairly accurate for 200 meters, and the same can be said about the top of the dotted vertical line here for 400 meters. For 1000 meters, I like to line the sight picture up with the target, framing it between the vertical and horizontal lines. It's not completely accurate, but more often than not, it gives you a good range to land that first shot and then adjust as needed. Now do remember that heat rounds will have their own ranging as well, and these are not strong enough to kill tanks effectively. The best way to use heat is to save them for lightly armored vehicles that are not a threat to main battle tanks, such as armored personnel carriers, technicals, logis, and scout cars. Although they may not destroy them as quickly, saving your sabot rounds for more threatening targets like spandrels, BMPs, or other tanks, meaning that you'll be able to defend yourself for longer without needing to fall back and rearm. For the Abrams, in general, I'd say this is a pretty easy tank to crew for. However, it does have a couple issues that may make engagements difficult. Although you will rarely fight from this angle, do note that the rear of the tank is raised slightly, which will not allow you to shoot as low as you can in the front, in addition to taking away about half of your visibility. I'd highly recommend the commander to take up the responsibility of scanning behind the tank, and that way your gun can always be facing front, where most of the engagements happen anyway. Additionally, the tank itself is incredibly loud. The Abrams is equipped with a turbine engine, commonly referred to as a jet engine because of its sound. Not only will enemies hear its tracks, but even stationary Abrams are easy to find and locate because of this engine. Unless I'm constantly moving, I always ask my driver to cut the engine to reduce the chance of us being heard and spotted. We'll dive into this a bit more with the strategy and tactics section at the end of the video, but the Abrams is just a bit too loud to ignore. Know that when you're in an Abrams, the only thing louder than you on the battlefield is a helicopter. The Challenger is the British main battle tank, and can fit up to 4 crewmen. Unlike the Abrams and the T-62 that have an exposed machine gunner up top, the Challenger adds in a loader position. This position has a full 360-degree crow's nest with 500 rounds of MG ammo. Like the Abrams, it can be stabilized and has automatic range finding on the bottom, despite only allowing for 1 level of zoom. The command turret has a much wider field of view, allowing for better spotting while finding targets. Although the sight can be stabilized, the commander has no machine gun to fire, making it purely a spotting tool. It may seem like a waste of a slot, but one person dedicated to scanning and calling out targets is incredibly important. While in the command hatch, all modern tanks have what's called hunter-killer capabilities. This allows for quick target acquisition without the gunner having to manually move and find the target. Hunter-killer, or more commonly referred to as snapping, is enabled when both the gun turret and the command turret are stabilized. Although both of these positions should always be stabilized, if for whatever reason you're having issues with practicing this, double check that you have stabilization on. Once stabilized, the commander can set the target for the gunner by pressing spacebar. This will automatically snap the turret on that exact spot the commander is looking at. As a gunner, you can also snap to whatever the commander is looking at by pressing E. Although both crewmen can snap to or force snap each other to whatever they're looking at, I find that it's always best to try and keep the roles separated. Essentially, the commander is the one doing the snapping, and the gunner will snap to the commander, but never vice versa. That way you prevent miscommunication and losing targets while your sight picture is flying around the screen. Additionally, never snap someone without first calling it out, as that crew member may be looking at something important. This will allow the gunner a second to understand what he's supposed to be looking for as he's being snapped. Lastly, although I have this turned off because I like the cleaner look of the HUD, if you're still having trouble remembering all of these keybinds, you can toggle them on and off in the interface settings under Show Vehicle Keybinds. Moving on to the gunner, the Challenger is equipped with 14 sabot rounds, 9 high explosive squash head rounds, and 3 smoke rounds in addition to the coax machine gun and smoke launchers. Unlike the Abrams, we have a pretty nice sight picture as a gunner. Down on the left we have 50 meters, moving diagonally up to 100 meters and then 200 meters all the way up to 500 meters. Although it isn't perfect, I find that this diagonal sighting is also fairly accurate for the middle ranges, including 300 and 400 meters. For 1000 meters, I use the bottom of the middle circle. For the most part, it just takes some time playing around in the tank to find these unmarked ranges, but guesstimating and using the distances labeled will typically get you near enough to do damage. Now these HESH rounds are similar to fragmentation rounds and should primarily be used for infantry targets. However, they can do damage to lightly armed vehicles. They're incredibly effective at room clearing, but since you only have 9 of them, I try to save them for bigger groupings of targets, and instead use the machine gun for 1 or 2 enemies. The smoke rounds are also incredibly effective when supporting your infantry. Lobbing smoke in front of the buildings or roads creates a huge smoke plume that can easily conceal friendly movements. Do note, however, that the smoke rounds themselves do minor splash damage, and firing too close to friendly troops can and will kill them. The Challenger is the one tank I would always recommend running with a 4-man crew. The driver has a very limited view with only one viewport, removing his ability to add in spotting targets, as well as making it harder for him to drive around. Additionally, by only having 23 rounds, that's 14 Sabo and 9 Hesh, finding targets and dealing with them quickly should be a priority, since you can run out of ammunition fast. By having a gunner, loader, and commander all scanning for targets, it's very difficult for the enemy to sneak up on you. It's no secret why my best armor game by far is in a fully crewed challenger on Al-Basra Invasion. As a gunner, I alone racked up over 100 kills, with us as a squad killing over 150 enemies without losing the tank or having a single crewman die. Use communication, keep an eye on your ammo, frequently RTB to fill up and repair, and have fun. The Challenger is a beast when played right, and I'd argue that it's only played right with 4 crewmen. Dude, nice eyes. The Canadians use the German-made Leopard. It has 3 crew spots with an exposed turret machine gun as well. Although an improvement to the Challenger, the driver is once again restricted to only 90 degrees of visibility through the main and right side viewports. As a driver, you'll want to be keeping your crew informed of your vehicle's component health, which can be seen around the speedometer. The overall tank health, commonly referred to as the hull, is located below, with the ammo rack, turret, engine, and tracks having separate health pools. When the hull reaches 0, the tank is destroyed, but many times you may see the health turn red and start quickly ticking downwards. This means that the tank is on fire and needs to be put out quickly before you explode. Staying in a burning tank will do damage to the crew as well, so it's best to immediately jump out and start repairing in order to put the fire out. Aside from the hull, more than likely you will have one or multiple components damaged or completely disabled when you get into a fight or run into enemy infantry. Although your gunner will be able to tell you when the gun is disabled, you'll have to relay to your crew damage to the tracks, ammo rack, and hull after each impact. Aside from the hull, the ammo rack is the most important. If this is destroyed, the ammunition in the tank will cook off and explode, destroying the vehicle. Getting tracked in a tank is common, so if this does happen, let your crew know and try to position your tank to face the front armor towards whatever is engaging you. Although you can move in circles with one track, losing the second one will prevent you from moving completely. Losing the engine will also disable you, but if you were moving when it did go out, you can often roll behind cover. Both the tracks and the engine can be repaired to allow you to keep moving, but make sure it's safe before jumping out of the tank. Although you might want to jump out immediately, if you're in a 2-man tank crew, it's not a bad idea to have the driver swap to the command hatch to help scan for targets and eliminate threats. If for whatever reason you do not see this repair icon, go to Settings, Interface, and toggle In-Game Help to have it on. The command hatch, however, has one of the cleanest sightlines, with a 360-degree view without much of anything on top of the tank getting in the way. Unfortunately, it does not have a secondary machine gun and is only used for spotting. For its armament, the Leopard is fitted like the Abrams, with 21 Sabo and heat rounds, as well as a coax machine gun and 40mm smoke launchers for defense. You'll also notice that the sight itself looks identical to the Abrams as well, but that's about where the similarities end. Now, as cool as the Leopard looks, this gun is nowhere close to being user-friendly. When we load in, you'll see that the automatic rangefinder on the bottom is not exact. Looking at this 200-meter target, we see that it says F020A. Now we want to focus on the numbers in the middle, since this is actually the range in meters if you were to times it by 10, as indicated by the smaller text below. This means that 020 is actually 200 meters, 075 would be 750 meters, and 100 would be 1000 meters. Now that we know how to read this rangefinder, we can also try ranging our targets. When zooming in, you'll notice ranges for your ammo type on the left side of the optic. This is used to indicate what your current sight is ranged for, adjusted for each ammo type. Once again, this is a bit confusing, so let's break it down. We have our Sabo round loaded, which can be confirmed by looking at the bottom right of the screen. This is a DM33 round, which we can then match to our range marks on the left side of the sight. The arrow indicates that the sight is currently ranged for 200 meters when using this round. To test this, we can see that we hit our 200 meter target. Now the arrow underneath the heat column is set to 100 meters. If we swap over to our heat rounds, you'll see that our sight picture does not move unlike the other tanks. However, if we do fire, we can see that the round shoots low and to the left, indicating that this is in fact ranged for 100 meters. This is even more evident when we swap to the machine gun. To range for targets greater than this default 200 meters, you'll need to press and hold X and use the scroll wheel to find the correct range. This takes some getting used to, as it requires you to cover a lot of screen in order to get information that you need. Additionally, for certain ranges, it almost feels like guesswork. If we look at the 700 to 1000 meter range, we see that we only get one range in between. In testing, I found this to be about 800 to 850 meters, with accurate shots requiring moving the sight to the right in order to compensate. I wish I had a perfect way to teach you guys how to range these weird distances in the Leopard, but the truth is it isn't very user friendly, and you'll have to take educated guesses based on your experience with the gun itself. I will say though that it does appear that many of these shots do land a little bit to the left, so take that into account when you're taking shots at non-exact ranges. My biggest tip for the Leopard is that the gunner needs to be aware of what he's working with. Having to constantly use X and scroll wheel to range targets can make it confusing, and it doesn't help that if you have previously ranged a target for a certain distance, the sight itself does not reflect that change unless you're fully zoomed in. As we can see here, I have my sights ranged for 700 meters with the Sabo. However, when I'm zoomed out, the sight returns to its preset position. This can be extremely disorientating when you're engaging enemy vehicles, since when you zoom in, your sight will suddenly drop down, requiring you to move it back on target. To quickly reset your sights, double tap X. This will bring everything back to the top, and will allow you to re-range as needed. I'd highly recommend resetting your sights after each engagement to make it easier for future ranging. Still, by having a fully manned crew, you should be able to quickly acquire and destroy targets. Finally, the Russians use the T-72. It fits 3 crew members, and although it is a modern tank with hunter-killer capabilities and defensive smoke launchers, from the driver's seat and command hatch it does look fairly basic. The driver only sees through the front port, which severely limits his view. And additionally, as a driver, you should be aware that the T-72's reverse speed is much slower than other tanks. In fights where you might have to disengage, it may be best to have the gunner use his defensive smoke launchers, turn around, and then use your own smoke trail as you drive away. This is a bit risky as you'll expose the backside of the tank, but if you can get out and behind cover quickly, then slowly backing up and taking another round, it is always worth it. As a commander, you're equipped with the NSVT machine gun and 2 boxes of ammo. Unfortunately, you do have no range finding ability, but you have plenty of visibility. As a gunner, you'll have what is arguably the cleanest set of gun sights in any of these tanks, as well as the largest selection of weaponry. The T-72 is armed with 20 AP Sabo rounds, 10 heat rounds, 9 fragmentation rounds, 2 reflex guided missiles, and a coax machine gun in addition to those smoke launchers. The main gun is ranged to 600 meters, and by zooming in you can quickly range for 100, 200, and 300 meter targets. For further distances, the smaller chevrons increase by 200 meters, making the middle ranges extremely easy to guess. For example, for a 1000 meter target, simply line the vehicle up between 9 and 11 and you're good to go. No matter the range, disabling the enemy should be your first priority as a gunner. You can do this by either hitting the tracks or the engine, but to be honest, the easiest way to do this is hitting either track, as it has the largest surface area on the tanks. It will take some time perfecting these shots depending on the range, but my rule of thumb is to always go for this mobility kill first. Taking a wild shot at a hole or turret can deflect, but AP rounds to the track will always disable it. Once the tank is disabled, the best places to aim for are the rear of the tank, back of the turret, or if you're facing the tank head on, the driver's hatch or turret ring. These areas have the least amount of armor, allowing your rounds the potential to do more damage. As a gunner, you'll know that you're actually penetrating targets when you see this type of explosion. This typically means you've done at least 25% damage. However, sometimes you might see something like this, which means the round has deflected off the armor. My biggest tip is that if your first round hits and explodes, try to hit that same location over and over again. As we know, swapping rounds will show a different set of ranges on your sights. However, if you've been paying attention, you would have noticed that by swapping rounds, you also begin the process of loading that round into the breech, causing a delay until you can fire. With the T-72's wide variety of ammunition, you may be tempted to constantly swap. However, I'd recommend keeping AP loaded if there's a potential tank, anti-tank vehicle like a Spandrel, or IFV in the area. To take out smaller vehicles or infantry, it's always quicker to swap to coax machine gun. Swapping to the coax is immediate, and as you can see here, you can still neutralize a Logi by shooting the cab and killing the driver. My biggest general tip for the T-72 is that although it's the only tank with a guided missile, don't treat this like a TOW or a cornet launcher. I did a bunch of research trying to understand the penetration and damage of the reflex, and after all the spreadsheets and testing, I've come to the conclusion that in a perfect environment, the reflex can do much more damage than a sabot round, but it is still a very difficult missile to use. For testing, I placed an Abrams at 200 meters and used both sabot and reflex to see what would happen. The first comment I would like to say regarding the reflex is to be aware of the flight trajectory. The reflex dips down and then up before straightening out around 300 or so meters. Because of this, close range shots can miss the target, which is not only going to look ridiculous, but it's going to waste that round, and will remove any sort of surprise you may have had on the enemy, as that crew will start to look for where that missile came from. On weaker areas of the tank, like the side turret, the reflex can do up to a third of hull damage, and bring the turret itself to below 50%. When compared to a sabot round, we can see that only 25% damage is done to the hull, and the turret itself is still at about 60% health. This means that the two missiles you have could potentially knock out the enemy turret and bring that tank down to a third of its health much quicker than if you were trying to do the same with sabot. The front armor is a different story. When using the sabot, we fired at the turret ring of the Abrams, the weak point where the turret meets the hull. This round penetrated and did significant damage, 50% of hull damage, 40% turret, and went right through the tank and knocked out the engine. The reflex is much harder to land these well-aimed shots due to the nature of the missile itself. When fired, although we're aiming at the turret ring, our first shot hits high alongside the sloped armor of the Abrams turret, doing no damage. Adjusting for the trajectory, we aim low and try to hit the turret ring again, but when looking at the tank, it appears that the missile hits heavy armor, resulting in no damage done. When we turn the tank around and take a shot at the engine, we see results similar to the turret. A third of hull damage done and the engine completely disabled. With sabot, the engine is still disabled, but once again, only 25% damage is done to the hull. I'm sure I'm going to get flack from some of you for saying this, since spreadsheets and damage models do suggest the reflex can penetrate and deal significant damage to tanks, but the missile as a whole is incredibly unreliable. I would strongly suggest only using this for extremely exposed areas of tanks that are not paying attention, such as the backside of a turret or the engine block, since one missile will do nearly as much damage as 2 sabot rounds. It is entirely possible to penetrate that front armor if you land a really good shot. I found this difficult to do in the training range, which is a controlled environment with 2 stationary tanks and nobody shooting at me. So imagine the difficulty you'd run into in a real game. Although you can use these to track tanks, frankly, the only time I've actually used a reflex is to see if I can hit a stationary or slow-moving light target, like a Logi, at around 1,000 meters. This will keep my tank from wasting an AP or heat round, but more importantly, the sound of the main gun will not fire, preventing the enemy team from hearing where the tank is. Now that we're familiar with all the tanks, there's a few crew-specific tips I'd like to touch on that I wasn't able to cover previously. For the driver, it's really important to understand how your tank handles. When possible, stay on a road, as moving off-road can cause the tank to move unpredictably. Since handling is different on roads versus rough terrain, you'll notice that if both tracks are on different types of ground, you'll pull off to one side, making it harder to stay straight. To help with turns, tap A or D slightly to make minor adjustments in order to stay on the road and keep your current speed. For big turns, we can use the handbrake. We mentioned this briefly with the Abrams, but if you're not moving, it's not a bad idea to turn off the engine in order to stay quiet. This can result in enemies walking or driving right by you since they do not hear your tank. Not only will it protect you, but it can allow you to hear your enemy tracks and engines as well, allowing for you to get the jump on them. Also, just because you don't see the target doesn't mean that the tank is in a bad spot. As a driver, your hatch is a lot lower to the ground, and oftentimes you will not see what the gunner is shooting at. If anything, confirm with your crew what they are engaging so you know how to react if you're hit. Base your armor in the direction of the fight, and get ready to adjust as needed. If you see that your tank is getting hit in critical components like the ammo rack, make minor adjustments in between shots. Do not move while the gunner is firing, or about to fire, as this can be deadly. Lastly, since you are lowest to the ground, make sure and keep an eye out for mines. Oftentimes they are dug down and look like this, but sometimes you'll see them sticking out as well. Either move around them or let your crew know to jump out and dig it down. But don't just pass it without saying anything. For the commander, your biggest job is to keep eyes on the tank's surroundings. Gunners tend to get tunnel vision, so it's important for you to keep scanning around and looking for potential targets or threats. For maps like Al-Baz or Invasion, you'll need to keep your head on a swivel for anti-tank, IED drones, techies, armor, and IED bikes. The worst thing you can do is only focus on where the gunner is looking. Keep an eye on the armor indicator on your screen and scan in the opposite direction. As a gunner, apart from armor weak points and component areas, one of the best tips I can give is that you should use WASD for finding targets, and your mouse for smaller adjustments. If you only use your mouse, you will quickly find that you will run out of mouse pad while turning your turret. By using A or D, you can swing this turret extremely fast, allowing you to quickly scan and acquire targets. If you do find that target, make the minor adjustments with your mouse, and fire. It should also be mentioned that when you do fire, anyone standing in front of your tank will be damaged by the pressure of the gun firing. If they are close enough, they will be killed. So, let nearby infantry know to stay away from the tank and clear the barrel before firing if they are in the area. Now, one of the most common problems you'll face is losing your turret. You will lose stabilization if your turret goes below 50% component health, and you will see a broken, cracked sight. At lower health, you will begin to lose mobility, until the turret is eventually locked in position. If you lose your turret, the best way to still fire on your target is to work with your driver. As the gun will jolt forward and backward as the tank moves, what I like to do is tell my driver to hold, as my reload is just about to finish. This lets the tank stop moving as the round is loaded and allows me to fire from a stable firing platform. The moment the round is off, the driver then moves, making it harder for the enemy to hit us. You can also tell the driver to turn the tank left or right if you need to turn your turret, but ultimately it's up to the driver to keep you in the fight. Low or no turret health usually means the tank is low as well, so if he does decide to back out, it's usually for your own good. The last thing I'd like to cover is tank-on-tank matchups, with the most common pairings you'll run across in squad. We could spend hours discussing armor, penetration, damage values, and all that good stuff, but to be honest, most of y'all want to know how to kill one certain tank effectively with one other tank. Once again, in a perfect environment, there may be times where damage models say differently, but I want to give you guys what typically works in game and how you can be successful. So with that, let's first start off with the Challenger versus T62. If we look at the T62's armor, we can see that the front hole and sides of the turret have the strongest, as indicated by the blue areas. Although we can penetrate these areas, it's much harder to do so, and these areas frequently deflect shots. AP rounds, and all rounds for that matter, will penetrate if they hit at a 90-degree angle, so aiming for areas that are flatter will typically have better results. As we can see here, the front turret has practically no armor, making it an easy target. I like to aim here if I'm facing the tank head on instead of the lower hull, due to the lower armor level. In the back, we can see that there is practically no rear hull armor. If you do catch the T62 from behind, keep sending rounds through the engine and you'll destroy it quickly. Also, remember that the T62 does not have any range finding capabilities. So, if possible, making slight adjustments or firing on the move can make it very difficult for the gunner to land shots. We ended with the Challenger saying it should fire and move to take advantage of the lack of the T62's range finding. And that's exactly what you should try to mitigate while in the T62 yourself. Aiming for disabling shots is huge when you're in the T62, as it will allow you to fire confident shots without having to constantly readjust or place observation marks to get the range. If you're landing good shots and not taking huge amounts of damage yourself, do not move the tank, as this will result in missed shots. Once tracked, look for the weak points, either the back of the turret or the back of the hull itself, or the front area driver hatch and middle of the front turret. If you notice that although the front edge and top sides of the front hull have blue and green armor, the front portion does not. This yellow armor is weaker, and if you're aiming for the driver's hatch or center turret, a shot that is slightly off target will more than likely hit low and into this area of the tank. Our next matchup is the Abrams and T72. probably the most common tank matchup in the game. If you've been paying attention throughout the video, you might have noticed that the Abrams, Challenger, and Leopard all have voice cues for when rounds are loaded into the chamber. That's because these tanks have actual loaders, whereas tanks as the T-72 have autoloaders, or automated systems that take the next round from the ammo rack and load it up. These autoloaders are slower to arm, so as an Abrams, you need to take advantage of your quicker firing rate. The T-72 is also extremely low to the ground, and much of it is surrounded by heavy armor, with the round turret also resulting in a lot of deflections. Although it doesn't show it in the model, you need to aim for the driver's hatch. This is the weakest part of the tank and is the only place you can reliably land shots without them bouncing. Additionally, like the T-62, if you're able to jump the T-72, the entire rear side of the tank has little armor. Tracking and engineering the vehicle can make it extremely vulnerable, so take advantage of your quick firing rate, land a disabling shot, and then dial your next ones to do the most damage. In my opinion, the T-72 should always win a fight against an Abrams because of the low profile and heavy armor, but you can't get too cocky. As you can see, there are many areas on the Abrams with heavy armor, and a lot of sloping angles that can deflect shots. The rear of the tank is also fairly protected, with only a few areas to do significant damage. The best way to deal with the Abrams is to shoot the turret ring, which we mentioned earlier in the video. This can do significant damage to the tank, and penetrating shots can even go through the vehicle and disable the engine. Aim right where the turret meets the hull, and more often than not, you'll be 2 or 3 tapping Abrams. If for whatever reason you do find yourself in a tough spot, remember that the Abrams has a quicker firing rate and is much more maneuverable. Although every tank fight should start with a tracking shot, it's even more important in this matchup, since the T-72's reverse speed is so slow. If you need to bail out of the fight, pop smoke, turn around, and then drive forward away from the fight. Staying in reverse can and will get you killed. For the Leopard vs T-72, it's basically the same as the Abrams. As a Leopard, you're going to be at a disadvantage due to the manual ranging, so although in a perfect world it's great to hit the driver's hatch, I've found it incredibly difficult to do that in a real game. Instead, aim for large, weaker parts of the tank, like the top of the turret or backside of the hull. If you do manage to land a penetrating shot, do not adjust and just keep sending those rounds. This is a very hard matchup for the Leopard to win, so it's better if you don't take the T-72 head on. I'd recommend lying in wait for it somewhere and using comms to figure out where the enemy is headed. By ambushing it, you'll be able to track it and should be able to take advantage of your fast reload in addition to dictating what range that fight will be at, making it easier for you as a gunner. As a T-72, the Leopard does not have nearly as much armor as the Abrams, but the same target should still apply. The turret ring and side and rear hull are relatively easy to hit, but if for whatever reason you can't land a good shot there, aim for the center of the turret itself. By hitting the center turret, you'll not only be doing damage to this yellow portion of the armor, but you'll most likely knock out the turret itself. Out of all the tanks, the Leopard is the one most reliant on its range finding, so by removing stabilization or preventing the turret from moving on its own, you've effectively removed its ability to shoot at you. Well, we made it. That was a long video, but I hope you guys were able to get something out of it because I know it's a lot of information. I'll also be releasing a part 2 in the future to discuss map-specific tactics and strategy, such as how to approach urban environments, fighting against infantry, and also squad leading multiple tanks at once. I really wanted to include them in this video, but it was going to be a bit too much in one go. I didn't even expect this one to turn out so long. Either way, when that video is done, I'll link it in the description below. If you liked the video, give it a thumbs up, subscribe for more squad videos, and let me know your thoughts and post any questions in the comments below. But that's it for me. Peace. Engine him?